Alright, in this video we're going to continue laying out our user interface for our Lucky Lotto number picker. So here's sort of the app we're sort of shooting for. As you see, we've got a set of buttons for picking individual lucky numbers the user can touch. We've got a big pick button for choosing all 6 new numbers. We have a segmented control that allows us to select the number of ping pong balls to choose from. And you can see in this particular, we want this thing to be able to look good under any of the iOS devices in landscape or in portrait mode, right? So let's look at what we did last time. So last time what we have is something that doesn't look very good. Here I'm using an iPhone 6 under the simulator, and you can see most of our views don't even show up in either portrait or in landscape mode. Right, so that's what we're going to work out next, is making sure this looks good on any device. So I'm going to go back to my project. So last time we used Interface Builder to just lay out all our views. So we have this sort of hierarchical views set up, right? So our controller has the main view, and inside that view we have a container view that has all our other views. Inside that container view, we have a button view that holds our 6 buttons. We have a title view that holds our title label. We have a pick view that holds our segmented control and a big pick button. So now I'm going to show you how to use auto layout constraints so that we can make these views resize themselves appropriately for any of the devices. So right now, if you see an Interface Builder, if you look down on the bottom of Interface Builder, you can say it's set now for width any to height any, right? And that's kind of, because I'm going to go ahead and set my constraints for any particular device. So I'm going to have one UI layout that's going to work using auto layout that's going to work on any of the devices. So I'm going to leave that set to width any and height any. So all right, so I'm going to do this from the inside out by setting auto layout constraints. And I should say from the beginning that this takes a bit of patience to do this correctly. So it can be a bit frustrating, I find, setting these constraints in Interface Builder. But it just takes a little bit of patience and understanding of what you're doing. So I'm going to kind of work from the inside out. So let me show you how I'm going to do this. So let me show you. I'm going to start with my buttons. And so I'm going to focus on how I want my 6 buttons laid out inside the button view. So you can see, so what I'm going to do is for the very first button, button 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the spacing from the top, the left, and the right, the spacing to its container view, its super view, which is our button view, right? I'm going to set those so those have a spacing of 8 points, right? We're going to work in points because every different device, whether it's a retina screen or a point's going to map to multiple pixels in the higher resolution devices. So I'm going to work in points. So I'm going to set these constraints so that the top of my button, the left side of my button, and the bottom of my button are 8 points from its containing button view. And then on button 6, I'm going to make sure that its trailing space, so this is the leading space, top space, bottom space. I'm going to make sure button 6 trailing space is 8 points from the button view, the super view, containing view here. So that's going to set that, right? And then I'm going to set a set of constraints that the distance between each of my buttons, the spacing between each of my buttons, is going to also be 8 units. And of course, those constraints aren't sufficient to determine the size of these buttons. So for instance, I've said nothing that constrains either the width or the height of these other buttons. So the next constraint I'm going to set, I'm going to make sure all 6 of my buttons have the same width. So they're nice, and they'll all be nice and evenly spaced with the same width. Now, to constrain the heights, what I'm going to do is I'm going to constrain so that all 6 of my buttons tops are aligned with the first button and aligned with each other, and that their bottoms are all aligned with each other. That should be a sufficient number of constraints to set up my buttons. So let's go do that with our buttons. So I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to start with button 1. I'm going to go ahead and select that. And down here on the bottom, you have your various tools for setting these constraints. You can get at a lot of these things from the editor or you can get at them there with these little TIE fighter symbols on the bottom. I'm going to pick the first TIE fighter symbol here, and I'm going to go ahead and set the spacing to the nearest neighbors. Now right now it's set to 20. I'm going to change these to an 8. So I'm just going to, these little I-beam things, I'm going to click on these 3 I-beams. I'm going to set the top one to 8, the left one to 8, and the bottom one to 8. So that's going to set the spacing to the top, the left, and the bottom. So my button is properly spaced on the top, the left, and the button. So I'm going to go ahead and set those. I'm going to go ahead and add those 3 constraints. And you can see my constraints come up as orange now. When the constraints are orange, come up orange in IB, that means that the constraints aren't sufficient. You've got an under-constrained system, which we obviously do. If you ever see red, that means you'll have an over-constrained system. So hopefully we'll avoid red colors in over-constrained systems. We might temporarily have an over-constrained system, but in the end, when everything works well, you'll see all these controls will end up being blue. So anyway, so now I go over to my right button, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pin its right edge, so its trailing edge to be 8 units from the trailing edge. So I'm just going to set this one I-beam on the right, and so I'm going to add that one constraint. So now I've got that constraint so that the trailing edge of my button 6 is 8 units from the trailing edge of the button view. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select all 6 buttons. I'll select the first button and then shift select the last one. It's kind of easier to do over here than in the hierarchical view. So now I got all 6 buttons, and what I want to do is I want to make sure that they all have the same height. So I'm going to go under this again, under the little TIE fighter icon down here. It looks like kind of an I-beam with a box in the middle. And I'm going to click, with all those selected, I'm going to go ahead and click on the equal widths constraint. So that'll add 5 constraints so that all of my buttons have an equal width. So why does that add 5 constraints? That's right, because there's 6 buttons, and right, so it'll add 5 constraints to make sure that they all have the same width. So now I've added those 5 constraints. Now what I also want to do is I want to set their leading edges. Let's see. Yes. So with them selected, so next to the little TIE fighter button is a button that kind of shows these alignment rectangles. So this is set my alignment constraints. So if all 6 of my buttons selected, I'm going to set their top and their bottom edges. So I'm going to go ahead and so that they're all aligned, and that'll add 10 constraints. All right, so I think we're still seem to be missing something, right? Oh, yes, we haven't done the spacing between the buttons. That's the one we haven't done yet. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I'm going to go ahead and select the buttons 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So, and I'm going to go to the little TIE fighter, and I'm going to set the constraint on that so the spacing between the buttons is going to be 8. So that'll go ahead and add 5 constraints. So there, so it still looks like we've got some sort of issue here. I think, yes, I think this issue is because we haven't set the container view yet. So I'm going to go ahead and select the buttons view. And I'm going to work on setting the layout for that. And you can see that it's not laid out anything like we want. So let's look at what do I want to do with that? So I've set all these constraints, but now I want to work on the constraints for the enclosing button view. So let me go ahead and, so for the buttons view, here's the constraints I'm going to set for the buttons view. I'm going to make sure that its center Y is aligned with the center Y of the container view. So this middle button view is going to be right in the middle of my container view. And remember, my container view holds all 3 of these views, right? So that's going to center it. And then I'm going to actually make the height of this button view to be 40% of the container height. So I'm going to constrain that. And I'm going to set the trailing space to be aligned with, to be 0, and the leading space to be 0. Actually, I'm going to set the trailing of my button view to be the same as the trailing edge of my container view, and the leading edge of my button view to be the same as that. So that'll actually put that into the middle. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to select the button view here. So with the button view selected, so I'm going to start by aligning it. So I'm going to align it so that it's horizontal center, and it's, yeah, so I want its horizontal, actually I want its vertical center. I want its vertical center to be in the canvas. So I'm going to align its Y value. So I'm going to actually add that one constraint. So that'll add a constraint, so that's in the middle. So now I actually want its height to be 40% of the containing view's height. So here's sort of the trick for that. What I'm going to do in IB is I'm going to, holding the control button down. Over here I'm going to hold the control button on button view and hold it up to the container view, and you're going to see that I'll get up a little menu. And in this I'm actually going to set it up to have equal heights. So right now it thinks it has the same height as the container view, which really isn't what we want. So I'm actually going to go find that. I'm going to go in the size inspector, and where it has equal heights, so over in the size inspector I can actually edit all these constraints. So you can see right now I have the Y aligned to the center and I have equal heights. So I'm actually going to change this. So, and by the way, the first item, you'll see the first item, a relation, and the second item. So the first item is my button view height, and the second item is my container view height. And right now I have those set to be constrained to be equal. Now you might have these backwards. If these are backwards, you can always reverse them and reverse them back so the first item and the second item are reversed. So I want to leave that equal, but I want the multiplier here instead of being 1. So I want the multiplier to actually be 0.4. So I want to be actually the height of my button view to be 40% of the height of my container view. So I'm going to set that particular constraint. All right. So I'm going to go back to my container view now and select this, and then I'm going to click on the little TIE Fighter icon again, and I'm going to set the, looks like, okay, this always gets a little bit frustrating. I want to go select on my button view. Yeah, okay. So make sure my button view is selected. Select on the little TIE Fighter. And you can see right now I'm going to go ahead and set the left and right spacing. So I'm going to these I-beams on the left. I'm going to make sure I set this to 0. I'm going to make sure that there's 0 on both sides. So I'm going to add those two constraints. And there we go. So let's see. So let's look at IB, what we got here. So I've got the center aligned to Y, the trailing space, the leading space, and proportional height. All right, so that part is set. All right, so we still have all these orange. So there's a lot more stuff here to constrain. Let's go ahead and work on the rest of this. So the next thing I'm gonna look at here is, so let's work on the title view. So the title view is, and the label inside the title view. So I'm going to go ahead. First of all, I'm going to set the I-beams on the title view so that this is always, so the title view is constrained to have spacing of 0 with the super view, containing super view, and the button view. And then I'm going to set up the label. I'm going to set the spacing between the leading, trailing, and top and bottom edges of this, so that there's a little bit of space there on that. So I'm going to go ahead and set those constraints right now. So all right, so here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and select my title view, and for my title view I'm going to go ahead and click on the little Darth Vader button, and oh, this is sort of, you have to be a little bit patient with this. Right now for some reason this is set to 111. I'm going to go ahead and click on the title view, and I'm going to drag this up just a little bit so you can see a little bit of, and then I'm going to kind of drag it back down again. All right, so here we go. So this takes a little bit of patience. So so those are 0, this one's -3. All right, excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and set all 4 I-beams on that. So we have 0 there. All right, so excellent, excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and add those 4 constraints on that, on the title view. And then let's go inside the label, and let's set the constraints on that. And we have the same I-beams, and I'm going to set all 4 of those I-beams, and I'm going to set the distance to the super views to all be 8. So I'm going to go ahead and add those 4 constraints. Okay, so all right, so let's go ahead and move to the bottom view for now. So I'm going to go to the pick view and look at it. So what do we want to do on the pick view? So on the pick view, I'm going to make sure this pick view, I'm going to set the spacing between it so it fills its top edge is 0 with the buttons view, and its leading, trailing, and bottom edges are all 0 with the container view. And then I'm going to set some constraints on the pick view. So we'll come back to that in a sec here. So let's first of all, let's start with the pick view. And I'm just going to go ahead and, okay, again, this is set to some crazy number, 112. So I'm going to grab this and just make sure that it's a little bit below that. Okay, so the problem is that edge is a little bit above it, so it thinks that I'm trying to connect the leading edge with the edge of the super view. So so select my pick view again and go here. Yeah, oh, it's still set to 114. Let's try this again. So again, remember patience. So I'll leave a little black there. That ought to make it okay. So I'm going to try it again now. All right, good. So I'm going to set all 4 of these I-beams. I'm going to set the top one to 0, the left one to 0, and I'm going to go ahead and add those 4 constraints. All right, excellent. So now let's go ahead and look how we're going to lay other things out here. So what I'm going to do next is on the pick button. What I'm going to do is actually going to align its right edge with the right edge of the 6 button. I'm going to align its left edge with the left edge of the 4 button. And I'm going to set the spacer here to be 8 points between the top edge of the pick button and the top edge of the containing pick view. And I'm going to set the trailing edge, or the bottom edge, to be equal to have a space of 8 points from the bottom edge to the bottom edge of the pick view. All right, so let's work on that. All right, so I'm going to select my pick button. And let's go ahead and let's start with this. Let's go ahead and set the I-beams on top and the bottom. I'm going to set those to 8 each. So I'm going to go ahead and set those 2 constraints. Now I'm going to go ahead and select, this is something that you couldn't do with the old spring and strut system. Is I'm going to select the pick view, and I'm going to select this. I'm going to select the pick view, and then I'm going to control drag to the 6, and I want the right edges aligned. So that'll align the right edges of that. Now I'm going to, on the pick view again, I'm going to go ahead and control drag from it, control dragging to that, and I'm going to set the left edge with that. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and work on the segmented control real quick. For the segmented control, here's what I'm going to do on the segmented control. Zoom in here. So on the segmented control, I'm going to have its trailing edge aligned with the center of the 3 button, and its leading edge aligned with the center of the 1 button. And then I'm going to have its vertical center be in the center of the pick view, and then I'm just going to set the spacing between the max value, like say 4 points. And I don't really need to worry about, I'll probably end up centering that on the button, but I don't have to worry about its size so much, because labels like this tend to have an intrinsic size, so I don't have to worry about that too much yet. So anyway, so let's go back. And let's go ahead and let's start by selecting the segmented control. So I'm going to select the segmented control, and let's go ahead and I want to align its vertical center in the container. Let's start with that. So I'm going to align its vertical center in the container, right? And then I'm actually going to control drag from the segmented control. I'm going to control drag up to the 3, and I'm actually going to set the right edge. Right now, it's not quite what I want. So if I select the segmented control again, if I select the segmented control and I look over here in the size inspector, I can see align trailing edge. So I'm actually going to edit this. So I want, right now, it's set to align the trailing edge of my segmented control to be equal to the trailing edge of the 3 button, which is not quite what I want. I want the actual to be equal to the center. So I'm going to change this to the center of the 3 button. And actually I want the constant here to be 0. Right? So that's, and all right, so now I'm going to have the trailing edge aligned with that. Right, so let's do the same thing on the, I'm going to control drag from the button to the 1 now. And I'm going to go ahead and set the left on that. And then I'm going to go back into the size. And now I'm going to say align the leading edge. I'm going to edit that, double click on that. And so I want this to actually, the leading edge of my segmented control, I actually want it to be set to the center, and I want the constant to be 0. All right, excellent, excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and set that. So we're done. All right, with that part. All right, so we set the leading and trailing edge of the segmented control. We could set the height of the segmented control as well. I'm going to leave that to just sort of its intrinsic height, because each of these controls has an intrinsic height. And then I'm actually going to go to the max value label, and I'm actually going to control drag from the, I'm going to do it over here. It's a little bit easier to do it over here. I'm going to control drag from the max value to the segmented control, and I'm going to align their centers. And then I'm going to select my label, and I'm going to set the space between it and its bottom. It's right now 8 pixels. I'm going to actually make that 4 pixels. All right, so I'm going to add that one constraint. All right, so we've got a whole bunch of, so I think we may have set all our constraints that we need. Maybe. So this sort of things get a little bit tricky at this point. Since I've got a couple of warnings, you can actually go look at the warnings. It has ambiguous layout. Oh, that's right, because we haven't set the container view yet. So the container view, aha. So this gets a little bit interesting. So, okay, let's work on setting the constraints for the container view. All right, so for the container view, what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that its center is aligned with the super view, both in the center X and the center Y. So I'm going to set those constraints. So then I'm going to make sure the height is actually less than or equal to 90% of the super view height. So you're actually going to use a constraint now that instead of just equals, I'm going to do a less than equals on that. So the height is 90% of the height. And I'm going to make sure that the container view is actually, the width is actually 90% of its super view, which is the main view. So its width is going to be 90%, but the height is constrained to be less than or equal to 90%. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to shoot for an aspect ratio of 130 to 100. Now, obviously, if I set that constraint, well, this is going to be an over-constrained system. There's no way that I can get this aspect ratio and all these other constraints to be true simultaneously. So it's going to be an over-constrained system. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to lower the priority on this. So the priority, up to now, all my constraints have a priority of 1,000, which means it's required. So I'm going to set the priority actually to 750, meaning I want this constraint to be satisfied if you can. Try to maintain this constraint as best you can. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take the container view. So let's start by aligning the vertical and horizontal center of the container view. So those two constraints. So select the container view again, and I'm going to control drag between the container view and the superclass view, and I'm going to start by saying equal widths. So now it thinks it's an equal width. So I'm going to go find that in the size inspector editor, and I'm actually going to change that. I'm going to change So the container view width is equal now to the super view width. I actually want it to be 90%, so I'm going to change the multiplier to 0.9. All right, so now the width is 90%. All right, let's go back to the container view, and let's go ahead, and I'm going to control drag again from the container view to the higher view, and I'm going to say equal heights. So I'm going to go find this in the interface builder, and so what you have now, I don't want them to have equal heights. I'm actually going to change the relationship to be less than or equal. And I always want this to be less, the multiplier now to be 0.9. So I want the height of my container view to never be greater than 90% of the height of the container view. All right, so one other thing I want to do is on the container view is if I go to the little TIE fighter, I want to set the aspect ratio. So I'm going to add one constraint for the aspect ratio. So the first thing is I don't want this to be required. So notice right now the priority is 1,000. So I'm actually going to set the priority to just high, 750. And I'm actually going to change this value to be, let's see, I want it to be wider. So I'm going to set this to be, say, 130 to 100. All right. So now let's see what kind of warnings. So all the warnings you'll see now, if you look over here under the warnings tab in the navigator, you can see everything just says sort of a misplaced view. So if all goes well, I should be able to choose the top view and go over under the selected views. I could say update frames, and boom, there, and all these other warnings should now go away, hopefully, since I got some misplaced views. Well, let's go ahead and let's give it a run and see what actually happens. So hopefully those warnings still has 10 warnings. Let's see what comes up. Hey, that's not bad. Hardware rotate left, hardware rotate right. So that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and stop, and let's look under warnings again. So it still says we have some misplaced views here that we have to work on. So maybe we'll work on debugging this a little bit later. So let's go ahead and stop the video there for now, and we'll kind of continue on the next one. We'll see if we can figure out what these problems are, fix them, and then again, you got to be patient with these auto layout constraints. But we've done pretty well so far. So let's go ahead and stop there.